We are never, ever, ever getting back together. Oh, sorry, I didn't see you. Really pulled a Challenger there. Oh, that's a slang term we at NASA use to describe messing up really bad. You want to learn more about the Challenger disaster? Well, no problem. I'll tell you all about it. You see, you don't need to know about that little plane-looking thing that comes back to Earth using magic. All you really need to know about is the fuel tank, which is a massive container of liquid hydrogen and oxygen, which is all well and good so long as you keep it away from fire, and the rocket booster that NASA strapped to the fuel tank. This is a special kind of rocket booster. It's a solid rocket booster, which are really, really nasty rockets. These, once they're ignited, you can't stop or control how much fire is coming out of them. In fact, the only way to stop them is to blow them up, which NASA has to do in the Challenger disaster. Now, the solid rocket boosters, or SRBs, are held onto the fuel tank with struts. And this lower strut is particularly important for us because it's right next to the seam, which I've drawn here in greater detail. This seam, one more time in greater detail, is a tang and clevis joint, which I remember with Wang and, it doesn't matter. The tang and clevis is held together with a pin there and then sealed with an O-ring, but for any manned mission, you want as many redundancies and safety as possible. So we, at NASA, added a second O-ring. Of course, there is a problem with that when your manufacturers tell you not to fly the rocket because the O-rings will not perform in weather under 40 degrees. And the projected temperature for that launch day was 36 degrees. But we ignored them and we launched anyways. And what happens on the launch pad is when the solid rocket boosters are ignited, this 5,000 degree exhaust runs, instead of out of the bottom, through the clevis and tang and completely burns through the first O-ring. Then, as it's blowing out of the second and venting to atmosphere, it forms a weld between these two pieces of metal, which seals the leak. This seal holds it all together up until it gets to the Q point, which is a point designated where the most dynamic load is experienced by the space shuttle. And at the Q point, a jet stream happened to hit the space shuttle. That jet stream tilted the space shuttle over on its side, and the engines had to cantilever over to compensate for that. When they did this, there was a little bit of extra stress, which was enough to pull these two pieces of metal apart, which broke the seal and allowed for all of this exhausting rocket fuel to start burning like a torch out of this joint. And when it did that, it completely severed its lower strut and burned a hole in the fuel tank. So now the fuel tank is on fire, and the solid rocket booster is only secured at the top, which allows it to swivel about that and push its way into the fuel tank, where it tears another hole surrounding the rocket ship in liquid hydrogen and oxygen, which later combusts, and the whole rocket ship blows up. So, what do we know what caused this? We know that the O-rings were only designed for temperatures as low as 40 degrees, and on that day, they were still launched at 36 degrees Fahrenheit. They were too cold and too brittle to form an effective seal, and as a result, were eroded away by the exhaust gases inside of the solid rocket booster. Now, to solve this, NASA added a third O-ring, a J-seal, and capped over that bit there, and really went above and beyond to make sure this never happened again. But ultimately, it's not too complicated. Remember, this isn't rocket science, it's material science.